To imagine the perfect city is to imagine Enneapolis, a shining utopia, a beacon of civilization that guarantees a bright future for its citizens. Built along a glistening waterfront and nestled in a lush valley, this metropolis harnesses the power of clean energy, cares for all its people's needs, and ensures quick and safe arrival to any part of the city via its impeccable public transit system. Everywhere you go, people are full of hope for the future, gazing ever at the horizon with a smile on their face. But take a closer look, and you'll see that smile is a hollow facade, a forced visage of calm to hide the terror and anxiety underneath, for this perfect city at all times is on the brink of annihilation. While the citizens do their best to uphold the virtues of Enneapolis, they are but human, and as time goes on, small acts of greed, wrath, and other sins leak out from behind those dazzling, empty smiles. And each one is monitored, calculated, and tallied by the city's enigmatic overseers, the Enneacraft. These Sinquisition machines keep track of each of the 9 sins established by their programming, and should this sin count reach its limit, these monitoring machines would unfold into mechanisms of destruction, bringing ruin to Enneapolis, before resetting the civic project anew. To imagine the perfect city is to imagine Enneapolis, where moral goodness is enforced on pain of death. So, what's the deal with Enneacraft? Well, they're a series of machine-type pendulum flip monsters, what a wild combination of traits, that are either level 1 Earths with 100 attack and 1000 defense, or level 9 Lights with 3000 attack and 2500 defense, but they all have a scale of 0. Yeah, it's one of those pendulum archetypes, like Nemlyria, where it has to find some other mechanic to show off that it's not like one of those pendulum archetypes. The central conceit of the deck is a control one, responding to various actions from the opponent by flipping up, searching you more on theme cards, then punishing your opponent with each card's particular flip effect. And the weirdness doesn't stop there. The idea the Enneacraft are based on is the Enneagram, which you can see in various artworks as a kind of halo. It's a way to map personality types that caught on as a pseudoscientific fad, but doesn't really hold up to any level of scrutiny. But the idea is that the graph maps out the, apparently, 9 different personality types, each one being given a name and a number. And if you look closely at each Enneacraft's name, you'll see which number it's associated with. Each personality is packaged with goals, wants, fears, temptations, that's a fun one, and most importantly for Enneacraft lore, virtues and vices. Each personality type has one of each, and the 9 vices in the Enneagram are the 9 sins that the machines keep an eye on. That's a very basic overview, but that's all the info you need to understand what's getting referenced here. And it's all fake, so who cares? Now, let's dig into the mechanics of the cards, because Enneacraft are doing some things that are super interesting. As pendulum spells, each Enneacraft gets an EC counter on it each time any number of monsters are flipped face up, a representation of the sins the machines are keeping track of. What do the counters do? We'll find out when we cover the field spell. For now, let's move on to the monster effects. Each has their own unique flip effect, as well as sharing an effect in the hand, letting you reveal them to special summon a monster from your hand in face down defense position. But if you do that, you can only special summon monsters in face down defense position for the turn. And that effect is not once per turn, nor does it have to summon itself. So a single Enneacraft monster in your hand can offload every eligible monster in your hand, including off-theme ones, because it does not specify. This also means you don't have to reveal the monster that you special set, so it's a complete surprise what you'll have in store. Then, you can just activate the Enneacraft you use to bring out all those monsters as a pendulum spell, effectively denying your opponent almost any information. But the third thing they share is what's really out there. When an opponent does a particular action, the trigger being unique for each Enneacraft, it will actually flip itself up from face down defense position as cost to do another thing. And that doesn't really happen in this game. Okay, to be fair, it's not unheard of, but we've never seen it happen in such a large concentration as this. While face down, effect monsters basically have no effects. All their continuous ones don't apply, and they can't activate any ignition or trigger effects because they don't have text. The exception has been cards like Big Shield Gardna, Midshield Gardna, Amaterasu, and Deus Ex Crawler, which states specifically that if they're targeted while face down, you can flip them up. This is one of those specific rules override general rules kind of things, but make no mistake, Enneacraft are spitting in the face of how the mechanics of the game are supposed to work, and I am so here for it. But with that basic overview out of the way, let's dive into some more specifics. Let's talk about our two groups of Enneacrafts, the Earths and the Lights. Let's start with the Earth ones, who are their octahedral forms they take before the sin counter reaches the maximum value. As pendulum spells, in addition to their effect that generates EC counters, they also all share an effect where, by paying 900 life points, you can reveal 3 Enneacraft cards in your deck, our opponent randomly picks one, and you add that chosen card to your hand, while the others go back into the deck. Yeah, the trade-off for having worse Cliffort Scout is that your deck is chock full of them, so as long as there's a card you're playing 3 copies of that you haven't drawn into yet, you're bound to have access to it, because you can just pick 3 copies of the same card. As for their effect when set, while they each have a unique trigger, each of them searches out an Enneacraft card as the effect resolves. So basically, the entire Pyramid Dimeripe line of monsters just gets you more stuff, but because they're also similar to each other, we can blitz through them fairly quickly. Proto-Enneacraft or Gaia's flip effect destroys a monster your opponent controls on flip, and can flip itself face up when your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand. So not necessarily the best synergy if the monster in hand isn't paired with an opponent's monster to punch. Deftero Enneacraft Alazonaya's flip effect banishes a random card from your opponent's hand face up until the end phase, and can flip itself up when your opponent activates a card or effect that includes an effect that adds any number of cards from their deck to their hand. Really cool synergy with the flip effect, since it will resolve on a new chain just after they got their search. Trito Enneacraft Exapatasaya's flip effect destroys a spell or trap card your opponent controls, and if you do, special summon a monster from your hand in face down defense position, and can flip itself face up when your opponent activates a card or effect that includes an effect that sets any number of cards, operating extremely well in decks using the recent phenomenon of setting their cards directly to the field instead of adding them to their hand, though this also means this card is absolutely brutal in the mirror match. And notably, if you added an Enneacraft card with its own search effect, you'll have one to summon after you blow up a spell or trap card. Ecto Enneacraft Tramaria's flip effect negates the effects of an opponent's monster your opponent controls until the end phase, and can flip itself face up when your opponent activates a card or effect that includes an effect that special summons a monster. That sounds like the two effects synergize well together. If your opponent special summons a monster, they probably want to use its effect, so negating it seems like a great idea. But then you have to consider that all of these Enneacraft flip effects are mandatory. So, based on how chains are built in this game, even though your opponent would put their effect on the chain first if it was their turn, mandatory effects always have to go on the chain before any optional ones. So Tromaria would try to target the newly summoned monster, but if they have an on-summon effect, or heaven forbid a quick effect ignition one, they can activate it higher on the chain, and because the chain resolves backwards, you'll only get to blank any other effects that monster has that turn. Just something to keep in mind. Then we have the last of our Earths, Anato Enneacraft Oak Niraya, whose flip effect shuffles up to 3 cards from your opponent's grave and or banishment into their deck, and can flip itself face up whenever an opponent activates a card or effect in the graveyard or banishment. This one's synergy is pretty off too, this time completely unrelated to mandatory versus optional effect chain building. The graveyard banishment shuffle will be on an entirely different chain, so if you were hoping to stop some kind of summoning or adding effect, you better hope there are viable targets after everything is said and done. A simple way of thinking about this is, our Earth monsters are the low-impact starter cards that put in some work, but are largely here to assemble all of our game pieces to make a big push for later. It makes a lot of sense, but there is one thing that's bugging me. For a deck focused around the idea of the number 9, with the 9 personality types, where you pay 900 life points to get a search, where the goal is to accumulate 9 EC counters to win the game, why in the world is the sealed form of all of our mechs an 8-sided polygon? Make it make sense. Next up, let's cover our light Enneacrafts, starting with what they have in common. Let's talk about pendulum effects again. Aside from their EC counter gathering effect, they've swapped out the search effect that their smaller versions have for a different one. At the end of the battle phase, if you have an Enneacraft card in your other pendulum zone, you can target a monster your opponent controls with less attack than this card and destroy it. Get 2 of these into your zones, and you've made the proposition of the battle phase very dangerous. Since all of them have 3000 attack, your opponent will need something quite quite beefy to stand up to them. As monsters, they can also flip themselves up in response to varying inputs from your opponent, but it's worth noting that of our light Enneacrafts, only one of them has a proper flip effect, even though they're all classified as flip monsters. This irks me in a way I can't truly describe, but I guess they had to do it this way since the flip effects of these new ones are actually continuous ones that apply after the associated monster has been flipped face up, as opposed to a traditional trigger effect. And because everything about these monsters is more complicated, we're gonna have to go through them one at a time. Enneacraft Isa Leon makes it so after it's been flipped face up while it's in the monster zone. Each time your opponent adds any number of cards to their hand by their card effect, no matter where it came from, they take 900 damage for each. It can flip itself up in response to your opponent activating a card or effect in response to one of your card or effect activations, which then returns up to 3 cards from the field to the hand. Sadly, this won't cause a big batch of burn damage because those cards were added to their hand by your effect, not their effect. But hey, hard to argue with a card that can potentially turn their Mulch armies into your win condition. And not only is 900 a significant amount of damage, especially when it comes to punishing decks that fold to Droll and Lockbird, it's important for, let's say, playing into our theme. It's also very funny to me that they chose the Lion Mech to be the one that punishes the sin of pride. Happy Pride Month, everyone? Enneacraft Astapixia makes it so after being flipped face up while it's in the monster zone, your opponent can't target cards on the field or in the graveyard with card effects. And it can flip itself up when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets any number of cards that you control, negating that effect, then banishing a random card from your opponent's hand face down permanently, being a much more punishing version of Deftero's temporary face up banish. Which is strange, because Deftero is not the sealed form of Astapixia, so they don't have a connection in that regard. But that doesn't stop this from being one of the scariest members of the theme. We're not just talking about targeting protection for your board and your graveyard, you're also making it so they can't touch any of their cards in their zone. If they need to pick something out of their graveyard or equip one of their own monsters with something, Pixia stops it before it can even get going. And because it flips itself up in response to any of your stuff being targeted, it's kind of like that protection is applying even before it's face up. Your opponent just doesn't know it yet. That's some next level outfoxing right there. Enneacraft Atulspia makes it so after being flipped face up while in the monster zone, your opponent can't activate cards or effects in response to their card or effect activations, and it can flip itself face up when your opponent activates a card or effect at chainlink 3 or higher to negate the activation of all of your opponent's cards and effects activated before this card in the chain, and if you do, destroy them. Folks, it's official, Vanity's Call is back and better than ever. For those of you who don't know, there's an old counter trap from the time the developers attempted to make chain-specific effects viable. It didn't go anywhere, but it did generate a very scary card that could wipe out a whole chain's worth of effects, not just the thing it immediately responded to. The only other effect to do anything similar to that is Tachyon Transmigration, but I would argue it's never been as powerful and accessible as it is here. With this, you can ensure that you win just about any chain battle out there. Bait your opponent into committing as many effects to the chain as possible, then take them all out in one fell swoop. The continuous effect might seem rather odd. Normally people respond to other players' cards and effects, but there are 2 very important cases in which this applies. Certain quick effects that can miss timing, and Seagawk. Let's handle the first one. If you have a quick effect that has to be responded to a particular game action, and you're counting on yourself to be the trigger for that, Atulspia effectively gets in the way of that. A big example is Thunder Dragon Titan, whose destruction effect checks to see if you've activated the effect of a thunder monster in your hand. Now, if it was a trigger effect, it would see the activation, wait for the chain to resolve, then trigger the destruction on a new chain. But because it's a quick ignition effect, it has to respond directly to that in-hand monster effect activation, which the big spider specifically keeps you from doing. Then there's Seagawk, the acronym for simultaneous effects go on chain. You've seen this happen when a Dracotail player fuses 3 Dracotail monsters together and puts all 3 trigger effects on the chain immediately, without you having a chance to respond. This can lead to some particularly effective chain blocking tactics, which Atoll Spia's effect that flips itself face up can deal with. But if the spider is already face up, your opponent's going to run into a particular problem. When building that Seagok chain, you are technically activating effects in response to your other effects, which is a big no-no in this case. Atoll Spia's main goal is to punish players that look to turbo out a ton of advantage all at once instead of taking it one step at a time, fitting for the Enneacraft that judges those ruled by greed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a video all about greed that I need to hide before it gets discovered, because otherwise I'm in big trouble! Enneacraft Torimar actually has a flip effect, which changes all of your opponent's monsters to face down defense position, and any monsters that were changed can't change their battle position anymore. Very brutal. And it can flip itself up when your opponent activates a card or effect on the field, though notably only when they do so during your turn, and it negates the activation, and if you do, destroy that card, effectively punishing your opponent for interacting with you on your turn, but only with things on their field. Honestly, this is one of our more straightforward big boss Enneacraft, helping to keep our opponent from interacting with us on our turn, sticking them with a bunch of face-down monsters, and then acting as a big beat stick until it interacts with how our spells work. Honestly, it's kind of a breath of fresh air to have a simpler one out of these big palookas. But it is kinda rude of your opponent's monsters, right? Like, a Torimar goes through all this effort to put on a big light show, breaching over the water in a display of technological marvel, and they all just look down at their phones? That's awful. Well, except for the Link monsters. And the tokens. I guess they're pretty chill. Enneacraft Archetypes makes it so after being flipped face up while in the monster zone. Each time any number of monsters are sent to your opponent's grave, they take 900 damage. And it can flip itself up when your opponent activates a card or effect that would destroy any number of cards on the field to make it so that all monsters, as well as Enneacraft spells that you control, can't be destroyed by card effects for the rest of the turn. So that's a nifty piece of protection, and then you get the benefit of another tax creature. Your mileage may vary here, but when compared to our other Punisher, Isa Leon, this one's a bit less relevant, especially because this doesn't deal damage for every monster sent to the grave, it just checks whenever that happens. So if 2 or more monsters get sent to the grave at the same time by milling or mass discarding or a board wipe, you're still only dealing 900 damage, while Leon gets to see each card added to the hand, regardless of the timing or amount. It's a fine card, though is a little held back by only responding to destruction effects when modern themes have so many more methods of removal. But they can't all be bangers. Seems like when they were passing out the effects, Archa got the tail end of things. Okay, that does it for the monsters. Now it's time for the spells. Just spells. I guess we were doing enough card flipping that the monsters may as well be our trap cards. And while we normally start out with the normal spells before the others, I feel like it's important to cover the field spell to get a handle on some of the intricacies of the theme, as well as revealing what has to be its main win condition. But before we do, I'd like to take a quick second to shout out my patrons. They'll be getting a proper credits read at the end, but their help is invaluable. Putting together these videos, whether it be explained, domain duels, or otherwise, takes a lot of time and effort, and it means the world that you all enjoy them so much. And an even bigger thanks goes out to all of those who support me directly. I'd love to go back to making these videos full time, and a pledge of even just $1 would help towards making this channel self-sustaining. Link is in the description. Thank you so much for your time. Enneapolis is a field spell card that is always treated as an Enneacraft card, so this is just as searchable via our level 1 monsters as the rest of our cards. Once per turn, during the end phase, remove all EC counters from your field, and if you do, your opponent takes 900 damage for each one. It can target any number of Enneacraft Pendulum monster cards you control and return them to the hand, and if any number of Enneacraft Pendulum monsters you control are flipped face up during the main phase, you can choose one of them and either return it to the hand or place it in your Pendulum zone. So there we go. This is the reason we want to accumulate so many EC counters. They win you the game. In another hilarious Nines reference, the amount of counters that you need to take your opponent from 8,000 life points to 0 is 9. But that's not the only thing it does. By letting you scoop up your Enneacraft monster cards, which means it includes the one in the pendulum zones if you want, you get to put them back face down. This is actually pretty elegant, because you might think the simpler way to handle this in a flip deck is to just flip your monsters back face down. But if you did that, it wouldn't account for the Enneacraft in our pendulum zones, so doing it this way lets you change your scales if you want. And because they go back to the hand, when you resummon them face down, your opponent won't know which one is which. switch, letting you maintain the element of surprise. Being able to do something similar on flip is also very helpful. You do want to set the level 1s at some point to get their search and utility flip effect, but they get crumpled if you so much as look at them. Being able to put them in the pendulum zone after a flip means that they're out of harm's way when the battle phase happens, and it lets you start accumulating those sweet, sweet EC counters. Now, can we get a splash of color on this city? I know we're trying to avoid committing any sins, but it is not a virtue to only be wearing the winter collection. Let's get some flair in here. Enneacraft Release is a normal spell card that places an Enneacraft Pendulum monster from your deck in your Pendulum Zone, and if this card is in your grave except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it to add a phase-up Enneacraft monster from your extra deck to your hand. This is an absolutely premium card, helping to ensure you get your game plan online as soon as possible. Use Release to put one of those Earth Enneacraft in your Pendulum Zone, use its effect to grab you another card, and then on a following turn, you can recover any Enneacraft that you've lost to the face-up extra deck, a place you'll have a hard time retrieving your monsters from since your scales, lack a top end. That being said, it is a little situational. Not for any mechanical reason, no, but remember, the Enneacraft only release into their true forms once they've witnessed another sin, so if your opponent is one of those lawful good types, you might have to utilize some of those temptations we were talking about earlier to speed things along. Enneacraft Reset is a normal spell card that places a copy of Enneapolis from your deck or graveyard face up in your field zone, or if you control Enneapolis, you can negate the effects of face up cards your opponent controls up to the number of cards in your pendulum zones instead. If your opponent activates a card or effect while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can banish this card to change Enneacraft monsters you control to face down defense position up to the number of cards in your pendulum zones. So you know how the lore says the Enneacraft reset the city after the sin count has gone critical? Well, here's that happening in action, which is why it specifically gets Enneapolis into play, with a little extra utility in case you're already on the right track. The grave effect is also pretty swell, giving you a way to reuse your monster's flip effects, because as it turns out, the only hard once per turn in the whole theme can be found on the pendulum effect of the Earth Enneacraft that searches you cards. Everything else is fair game. And hey, you also get a rainbow to go along with your post-apocalyptic renewal. Happy Pride Month? I'm not upset or anything, I just didn't know the robot apocalypse would be so queer. Enneacraft Rebirth is a normal spell card that shuffles any number of Enneacraft monster cards from your hand and or face-up field into the deck or extra deck, then draws cards equal to the number shuffled. If your opponent normal or special summons any number of monsters while this card is in your grave, except during the damage step, you can banish this card to activate one of these effects. Either special summon an Enneacraft monster from your hand in face-down defense position, or change a face-down defense position Enneacraft monster you control to face-up defense position. While all of the Enneacraft come with a way to flip themselves up, it's nice to have a backup plan in case your opponent has a way to play around them. Summoning one from hand can be good since we have a tendency to search out a fresh monster during our opponent's turn, so this gets them into rotation quicker. But notably, since it says we can summon an Enneacraft, we do actually have to reveal it, so your opponent gets to know what you're up to. And all of that is after you incorporate the fact that it's stapled to a magical mallet, letting you pick up cards from the field as well as your hand to find some other goodies. But it says it can shuffle cards into the extra deck. Seems like we've got an Enneacraft extra deck monster on the horizon, and honestly, keeping that from us is the real sin. Alright, so that's all the Enneacraft cards, but what do we do with them? Well, this is the tricky part. See, while having an archetype that can summon any monster face down means you can cheat a bunch of flip effect monsters into play that were never meant to be that easy to summon, the archetype doesn't have a way to flip up non-Enneacraft monsters at quick speed. So you'll also need to supplement your engine with some general flip support to make sure all the gears are turning, and maybe a pendulum support card or two wouldn't hurt either. So what can we play to help them out? My first thought when considering what flip themes would love to be included in this was Prediction Princesses. Tarot Ray and Tarot Wraith are both fantastic rituals for enabling flip shenanigans, and any help getting Bibliomuse active is welcome. But then I came to the upsetting realization, the summon lockout from the Enneacraft effects the entire turn, not just after you activate it. So resolving Prediction Ritual is almost impossible. But then I was elated to find out that their latest ritual spell, Underworld Ritual of Prediction, can ritual summon monsters in face down defense position. Happy days! Another flip theme with a ton of gigantic monsters is sub-terrors. Like with Prediction Princesses, I was dismayed that their self-summon effect would be offline if you used any Enneacraft summon effect, but then I remembered you could just use the Enneacraft summon effects to put them onto the field, which also maintains their secrecy. Now you can add a ton of other utility effects to your theme, like Foolish Burials, Book of Eclipse, Dark Core, and even weird Change of Heart. Not to mention that Sub-Terror Succession can help you tag out your Earth Enneacraft and flip Sub-Terrors to help align the cards that you need when you need them. And while not a Sub-Terror card specifically, you might find some utility with this spiritual successor, Terrors in the Hidden City. This card turns your dinky Earth Enneacraft into 2500 defense blockers, so they become a lot harder to run over in battle, and your light ones now spring up to 4500 attack, if you ever wanted to make the deck more aggro-themed. Even though they were mentioned previously, Deus Ex Crawler feels like it was made to fit into this theme. It has its own self-flip effect when targeted by the opponent, which negates that effect, destroys the card, then applies a skill drain to the opponent's board. Not only that, it floats, getting you another level 9 monster with a different type and attribute from itself. And you know what's not an Earth insect? Light machines, baby! It's also hard to go wrong with the Wake Up monsters. You have to say it like that or it's not the same archetype. Earl is pretty nasty removal on the flip once you bring all your Enneacraft to play, and Kuro has a quick flip up installed to help us flip those patties. And not to mention Mocha can do the same thing as an in-hand effect. And Makia is just kind of there, supporting the team. In a theme with all 0-scale pendulum monsters, you're not really going to be utilizing the mechanic very much. Now, you don't have to, the deck works perfectly fine without it, but what if you want to? Well, first you're going to have to avoid doing any of the Enneacraft summon effects because that just shuts that out entirely. And second, you're going to need some big enough scales. Sadly, the 10 and higher crew is full of a bunch of monsters that are either theme specific or start out in the extra deck. But there is one very funny one I'd like to put forward, Moissanite the Comet General. Thankfully, it won't stick around in your pendulum scales for long because it'll just bounce itself. And if you choose to put it on top of your deck, you can end up getting a second pendulum summon for the turn. Now it's only from the hand, but if you stacked it up with a bunch of Enneacraft, you can barf them all out, do a ton of Link summons, and then use your regular pendulum summon to bring back all the big Enneacraft to zones those Link monsters point to. As for a silly tech pick, several of the cards mentioned here have ways of manipulating flips, but I've got a free agent that's got some sauce. Sphinx of the Cycle is an absurdly easy monster to summon because it just needs to see the position of a monster change. Now, notably, going from face down to face up defense position is not a position change, but if you flip something from attack to face down defense position with, say, a Tori Mar, that will get out the big cat centaur. From there, you can get a copy of Book of Moon and Book of Taiyu onto your field each turn, with Book of Moon already being famous for its toolbox of utility, while Book of Taiyu gives us a lot of speed, because it allows us to immediately flip up any monster that we've special set with our Enneacraft. And that's all I've got to say about Enneacraft. The mechanisms of the deck are kind of wild, though I can imagine it rubs a lot of people the wrong way that a deck full of interruptions and stun tactics have a way to burn for game without needing to go in for an attack. Time will tell if they can grind games to a halt in such a way as to stop the ongoing march of aggro and combo, so for now, I'm hopeful that any frustration now will lead to an advent for flip monsters in the future. But for the love of God, if you are not going to print a flip effect on it, then don't make it a flip monster. That's like making a tune that can attack the turn that it summons. Oh no. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do you find the deck to be particularly Enneacrafty, or are there sins too much to forgive? Let me know down below, and if you haven't already, please be sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, click on one of my videos in the sidebar to help me show up on your homepage, and be sure to share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout while helping out the channel. It was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders, Upstairs Media and Ignavius, Nebula Navigators, 3rd Dynasty, Adam Zajdel, Ancient Wizard, Andrew Newman, Battle Axe, Beastsman, Charlie Mercury, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Eric, Frankie, Great Big Pillock, Groog, Hairbear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Japan Man, Carp, Marion James E. Picata, Meme King, Muse Clark, Neon Yaminair, Orozco 09096, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, That One Dumbass, The Critic of Innocence and The Wizard Moose, Cosmic Crusaders Animasta, and Thorak, Anything You Can Say, Blitzwolf, Chaz Ghost, Christopher Fuss, again, Cool Trainer Dark, Detenchi 67, Dr. Entity RIP, Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Eva Padilla, Herbal D, Inblink, J.A. Flair, Julian Marquis, Kale the Dragon, Kryptonian Blurred, Lobomaru 02, Manga Pages, Millennia Asta, Mr. Machina, Natiel Lee Alexander, Not Al Gore, Obsidian, Papa Cosmic, Puppycorn Game King, Rhyme Kairos, Rogue Wolf, Seraph SG, Shizuki Nijimura, Simic Toadstool, Stephen Huntsman, The Legendary Raven, The Queen of Time, Tiger X2476, Tristan O'Meara, Rider 2400, Zayden, Zaldreka, and Azentha, as well as all the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another video about giant floating geometric mechanical monstrosities who bear the ordinance and mission of the divine, check out this video where I cover Clifforts. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.